Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on MSMEs breaking out of the Chakravyuh this beautiful Saturday morning. This seminar is jointly organized by two centers of SPJIMR. As most of you would be aware, SPJIMR is one of India's premier management institutes and is a part of the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan group. The two centers organizing this are the Center for Family Managed Business, or CFMB as we call it, and the Center for Financial Studies, or CFS. Let me give you a brief introduction to these two centers. The Center for Family Managed Business has been the pioneer and leader in the formal learning of family managed businesses in India since 1997. It runs a flagship program, which is an 18-month postgraduate program for members of family managed businesses, who would like to develop their skills for taking on the future challenges and opportunities of family managed and family owned businesses. The center has the privilege of having facilitated learning to thousands of family managed business owners and members over this time period. It also operates certain other courses. These courses are shorter courses. They are like ladies in family enterprises, women in family business, owners advantage advanced management program, and so on. And this center is, as I mentioned, at the forefront of training for members of family owned or family managed businesses. The other center which I wanted to just dwell on briefly is the Center for Financial Studies. The Center for Financial Studies has been set up about a year back, and it has been set up as a center of excellence for finance. It is a unique platform where academic experts, industry practitioners, and policy makers all get together to inform or to form industry practice and to guide public policy in areas where it can. The vision of CFS is to be the knowledge partner of industry, and also to be the authoritative source of research, policy advice, and education. Now, how is it proposing to go about doing this? So, number one is research, through which the center aims to carry on research in various areas and propagate that knowledge to a lot of the participants in the industry. The second one is obviously training. So, the center also proposes to train practitioners in various areas of financial services. And the third one is actually to undertake specific projects for industry, where where industry and the center can come together. Now, coming briefly to the program, to this webinar. This webinar has rightly been titled, MSMEs breaking out of the Chakravyuh. The Chakravyuh is a very favorite kind of picturization or visualization for a lot of us. It immediately takes us back to the Mahabharata and our favorite hero Abhimanyu. Abhimanyu knew how to get into the Chakravyuh, so he could actually get inside, fighting his way through. But unfortunately, he did not have the knowledge of how to exit the Chakravyuh. And since he did not have that knowledge, unfortunately, he had to die fighting in the battle. In the modern age, the analogy is MSMEs. MSMEs and their entrepreneurs thereon have already got into the battlefield and already in the thick of things. They are running enterprises. They have to face daily challenges. They have to face compliances. They have to face their customers. They have to face a whole host of issues, many of them systemic in nature. And many of the MSMEs just don't have the knowledge to be able to get out of this and progress their business to the next level. So what we thought was that we would organize a panel which comprises people who have the knowledge of how to get out of the Chakravyuh and facilitate their sharing knowledge with the MSMEs, so that people who are listening in on this program are able to take their businesses to the next level and don't face necessarily these challenges of survival on a day-to-day basis. Our moderator for today is Dr. Tulsi Jayakumar. Dr. Tulsi is a renowned academician. She is Professor of Economics and Chairperson Family Managed Business at SPJIMR. She is an alumnus of Delhi School of Economics. She's been in the academic field for over 28 years. Okay. And she's been certified by the Family Firm Institute in Boston as a family business advisor. Her research interests span different areas of economics, okay, and also family business. She writes extensively in the media, okay, on various topics, and many of you would have read her articles in the media, in various renowned newspapers in India. She has co-authored books with eminent people from industry and academia. Her cases are acclaimed as most popular, global best-selling, etc., and many of the global case repositories like Harvard and Ivy. Okay, and she regularly conducts workshops for for owners of family-managed businesses. Okay, so who better to understand MSMEs and their problems than Dr. Tulsi Jayakumar? In addition, she is also a member of the FICCI Maharashtra State Executive Council and the INC Managing Committee on Industry and Trade. Okay. With all this, and to add to all this, okay, it's also the fact that Dr. Tulsi, as I have known her, is never content with only identifying problems. She always asks, okay, this is a problem, but what is the next step? What is the solution? So I think the panelists today are going to face the scrutiny of Dr. Tulsi when it comes to asking for solutions to these problems, which in turn, many of you can take back to your businesses. Here is handing over to you, Dr. Tulsi. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Mohan. That was a very nice start to the whole program. And I think for the first time, CFS and CFMB are coming together to do this kind of a webinar. And this is really, really exciting because I think these are, minds from the best minds from academia and from industry, which have been working on the SME problems, which are assembled today to try and look at what could be the best solutions. So we have an eminent panel with us today. I'm going to just briefly introduce to you the members of that panel before we start off. To start with, we have Professor Nirvikar Singh, all the way from US. He is a distinguished professor of economics in the University of California, Santa Cruz. Professor Nirvikar Singh, if you can put your video on. So if we can have all the panelists with their video on. Welcome, Dr. Nirvikar. Thank you so much for accepting our invite. Dr. Nirvikar is in the US for the last 10 years. He has been holding the Sarabjit Singh Arora Chair of Sikh and Punjabi Studies at the University of California, Santa Cruz. But his connect with India remains strong because he's been a member of the advisory group in the finance committee. He has been with the, he's been a consultant with the Ministry of Finance as well. And he also serves as a member on the Punjab State Advisory Council and expert group of the government of Punjab. His research topics include entrepreneurship, and as far as macroeconomics of the Indian economy is concerned, you would find a lot of his work in the newspapers and in the articles as well. He has also co-authored a number of books in his field of study. Welcome, Dr. Nirvikar.
Thank you.
Our second panelist is someone who's from the industry, Mr. Varadhan. Varadhan, if you could, yeah, thank you so much. So Mr. Varadhan has a career which has spanned over 35 years. He's a mechanical engineer by profession, and he has extensive knowledge across a whole gamut of the rotary equipment industry. He's an alumnus of MNIT Allahabad and OUBS Milton Keynes, UK. TRV, as people know him in the industry, affectionately call him in the industry, has been at the helm of affairs of Mascot Systems Private Limited since 2006. His forte is mechanical seals, pumps, and valves, mainly related to the process industry. Now, in addition to running his own outfit, he's also a member of the advisory board of the Refinery and Petrochemical World Expo and also the SME Chamber of Commerce, Mumbai. He's regularly sought for by various government authorities in regard to the MSME industry, and he has been appearing in a number of TV programs in connection with the same. Welcome to the program today, Mr. Varadhan. You are on mute. Our third panelist for today, again, is someone who's extremely well known and recognized in the industry, Mr. Manish Jaiswal. Manish is the MD and CEO of the housing finance and the SME business of Magma, which is an NBFC working with SMEs. He's an engineer from BNIT Nagpur, and he has also done his fast track general management from IIM Bangalore. He again is someone with a lot of experience, more than 27 years of experience in banking and the financial services sector. He started off with companies like iSure and so on, but he has also had a stint at CRISIL. And where he has really worked at would be institutions like Citi, Fullerton, iSure Motors, Dhanlakshmi Bank, and so on. His deep skill and proficiency has been in the SME banking and asset-backed financing, and he has built businesses financing assets of more than 15,000 crores in the last 20 odd years. Welcome, Manish, to our panel as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today this morning. I'm going to share the screen just very briefly, right? And so Mohan spoke about the Chakravyuh, and he spoke about why this Chakravyuh and what is the analogy that one can draw to the SMEs in India. So as we see it, the Chakravyuh is something which poses layers of challenges for the SMEs in India. And I'm going to talk about the SMEs in the context of the family managed businesses as well. The fact that most of our SMEs are family managed businesses creates a layer of challenge which goes beyond the business challenges, right? So if I'm looking at the Chakravyuh as a topic, why are we talking about the SMEs today? We have a whole lot of people in the audience who are FMBs, family managed businesses, a lot of them who are SMEs. But a whole lot of our audience comprises of people who do not understand the SME segment or the family managed business segment. For those of you who are not aware of this, there has been a recent change in the classification of the MSMEs in July 2020. And post this change in the classification, it seems that 99% of the businesses in India, based on the asset and the turnover criterion, are actually falling in the purview of the SME sector. Why are SMEs important? Because a whole lot of the contribution to the GDP, to the jobs and the employment scenario in the country, to the exports in the country, to the manufacturing in the country, okay, all of these which are economic in nature are driven by our SME sector. But at the same time, SMEs are also important instruments of building equity and social cohesion within the economy, right? Because more than 66% of the SMEs are actually owned by the socially backward groups. 51% of the SMEs are rural in nature. So if you're looking at rural development, if you're looking at growth, you would need to have the SMEs growing in order for India to be growing, right? And the pandemic has shown that while we are looking at a certain group which is being called vulnerable, the economically most vulnerable group is the SME group. So in the context of that, I'm kicking off this discussion with saying what are the kinds of challenges at the business level. And I'm going to invite the panelists to speak regarding multiple aspects of these challenges. That would be our first round. So the challenges would pertain to the financial aspects of it, the liquidity, the asset quality, the lack of proper record keeping and accounts which most SMEs face, the ability to plan risks and deal with uncertainty, which is not there. The fact that most of these SMEs are actually present in sectors which have very low productivity, and because of that low productivity, the wage gap between the large and the small firms with its implications for talent acquisition is very, very high. The technology adoption ability of these SMEs, the digital diffusion, the ability to face cybersecurity threats when you're looking at markets which are global, right? The skill divide, all of these are huge. The markets with the current slowdown, the trade tensions, and the disruption of the supply chains, all of these pose multiple layers of challenges. And to top all of this, we have other challenges which come from the family side and from the ownership side. And the family side challenges for the SMEs comes from the fact that whenever there is a succession, there is a change in the culture of the organization. There is a change in the psychology of the organization. The way in which hiring of talent is looked at within the SMEs, and how that has really taken a kind of a hit during the pandemic. So there would be all these different challenges that SMEs face. And this is, since we are in Mumbai and I couldn't restrain myself from using some Bollywood dialogue out here, what happens in SMEs, unfortunately, does not remain in the SMEs. There are multiplier effects, there are transmission effects, which go from the SMEs to the rest of the economy, with a huge kind of connect between the SME and the rest of the Indian economy. And so I'm going to start with inviting Dr. Nirvikar to speak about the macro implications of the challenges which the SMEs face. To start with, Dr. Nirvikar.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Mr. Natarajan and Dr. Jayakumar and SPJIMR for this opportunity. To just stick with the metaphor for a moment, I think my co-panelists, Mr. Jaiswal and Mr. Varadhan, are actually on the battlefield. And what I'm going to do is maybe give you a sort of an aerial view of the battlefield. And so if anybody's going to get you out of any Chakravyuh, it's going to be my co-panelists. And I'll just give you a little bit of a map. I think Dr. Jayakumar has already given you quite a bit of overview. I think what I'll do actually is start with something from a very new McKinsey report. And I'll just share my screen. So I hope you can see that. Yeah, so this is from a report called, I think, India's Turning Point. And there's a shorter web version available, but if you find the right place to click, you can download the full PDF report. And this is from page 85 or 95 of the report. And I'd recommend the report to anybody who's interested in the Indian economy. What is this showing us? This is showing us relative numbers of firms at different levels of revenue or turnover compared to some peer group economies and scaled per $1 trillion of GDP. If you look at this, what you see is Indian firms on the left and the peer group on the right. So the overall message is that actually India is relatively thin in the number of firms at every level. I'm not sure that our mapping of micro enterprises is that accurate. The main point, and this is really brought out very nicely in the McKinsey report, though it's a point that has been in the economics literature for at least a decade or two, is that India is really underrepresented in small and medium firms. And the point that the McKinsey report makes is that in order for India to achieve 8% growth, it's going to have a sizable number of small and mid-sized firms growing to become large firms. And I think the number they quote is 1,000, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's surprisingly, India actually has very few firms that are growing into that category. And in some sense, this is the this is the key not only to breaking out of the Chakravyuh, but also winning the battle. If we're talking about now the Mahabharat, I think this is where the battle is going to be won if we can support small and mid-sized firms to grow into large firms. Now, just very briefly, what are the obstacles? Why hasn't this happened? There's some information in the McKinsey report, and there's a lot of other research as well. Dr. Tulsi also touched on some of these things. The playing field is never going to be completely level. Large firms are going to have advantages in many ways. I think the problem in India is that the playing field is very heavily tilted against small and mid-sized firms. I would say that the most important constraint is finance. And there are two aspects that one is the cost of finance. It's high for all firms in India, but it is especially challenging for small and mid-sized firms. And then the other problem is that there are constraints, quantity constraints on finance. And so this is a very, very big issue which can only be dealt with at the national level, where I think we have a lot of issues in the financial sector which first have to be fixed. And then you need a whole host of very bold reforms, I think, to make it possible to finance small and medium firm, mid-sized firm growth that is needed for 8% growth for India in a sustained manner. I would say the second most important constraint is very broadly ease of doing business, of course. And I think one of the main aspects of this is simply the cost of dealing with government and the cost of dealing with contracts and courts in particular. There's some aspects of ease of doing business which have improved in India, but I think small and medium firms are really, the playing field is tilted against them when they are dealing with bureaucrats and when they're dealing with the courts. And some of this actually really has to be dealt with at the local level. I think a lot can be done by local, I guess I mean state. There's a lot of progress that the states can make in terms of making it possible for small and medium firms to grow. So here you have basically, I'm simplifying a bit, but you have two main constraints. One is finance, one is cost of doing business. The playing field is tilted against small and medium firms. On the one, for finance, I think you really need the central government to be very innovative and move very fast. And for ease of doing business, it's really a state and local thing that it's going to be very customized, and what's going to work in Mumbai, it's going to be different from what is going to work in Ludhiana and so on. But there's a lot of scope if the center supports the states and gives them the freedom. There's a lot that can be done there. And just to round this out, actually, this is a very, very critical time. The COVID-19 pandemic has hurt small firms much worse, small and medium firms much worse than large firms. I think there's already empirical evidence that these firms are hurting very badly. They are also having, again, a harder time getting access to, things like bridge finance and so on. And this is a problem in other countries as well. But I think in India, it's particularly acute because the playing field was already not level. There are other issues like, the nature of competition and talent and so on. And maybe I can come back to those. But I think I've given you a very simple overview and identified what I see as the crucial problems that small and medium firms face, and also emphasize that it's really fixing these problems that is going to be key to 8% growth for India for a sustained period. Okay.
So, Dr. Nirvikar, thank you so much for that opening comments. You spoke about the quality constraint. You spoke about the ease of doing business. I've been thrown out. Okay, sorry. So you spoke about the quality and the ease of constraint, the ease of doing business. And it's kind of fascinating because yesterday I was talking to one of the SME owners. In fact, the last couple of days I've been speaking to quite a few of them. And what they're saying is, and I would want both Varadhan and Manish to also touch upon this. So, these are basically SMEs who are exporters. And with the geopolitics after the pandemic changing, there are mails which are being sent out to the Indian SMEs to say that, it's tough dealing with the Indians. We know that your quality is not the greatest, but we want to explore India because we do not want to do business with China. Right? I was speaking to someone yesterday who said that when his father went international for the first time, he went with a certain kind of a quality adherence system, which was more Indian in nature. Okay, I'm not going to give the name so that we don't get into that. But he basically went and said, this is our quality certification. And when the foreign partner said that, this is the international quality, it was quickly changed once he came back to India because he wanted to do that business. So the quality constraint is something which is definitely there. And I think as SMEs, if that realization is there and you try and look at this crisis as an opportunity to build international markets by stepping in where China was there, I think that is an opportunity which is worth taking. But Varadhan, I would like to come back to you. Almost the same time as this month, in fact, in July 2019, last year, there was this committee which was set up by SEBI Chairman UK Sinha, and the expert committee, Sinha-led committee on the MSME sector, had suggested that the SME Act of 2006 needs to be reimagined with particular focus on market facilitation and to promote the ease of doing business, right? So it's 1 year since that act, since that committee has reported, right? We had an act in 2006 that has been, suggested to be reformed. There are delays in payments, which all of us are aware of. But then could you tell us, give us a granular view of what are the kind of challenges which are facing the MSME, taking an industry vertical perspective or whatever?
Thank you, Prof. Talking about challenges which the SME face, it's not only the financial challenges that they face on the one hand. While you need a lot of capital and loans coming in from the banks, which is a constraint because most banks do not want to lend to SMEs with the fear that it's going to be an NPA sooner or later. The second point is, having got those loans from the banks, there are issues which come out from large corporates or even the government organizations. Sometime back, I was in a webinar with Nitin Gadkari, wherein the total amount that was outstanding, which he was not aware, and we had to prompt him across to tell him that it's a little over 5.5 lakh crores. This is only from the government organizations, notwithstanding the fact there are large corporates who also love to run their business with the funding of the SMEs that they're doing to them. Most large corporates do not want to register you as SMEs. They suggest if you want to register as an SME, consider the business is not coming through to you. The primary reason is they would love to enjoy larger credits. 60 days, 90 days, 120 days. This is how it works, one, on the financial segment. The other issues that they are facing, I don't know, you may be aware of the latest things that have come in effective 1st of October 2020. There is another financial challenge which the SMEs are going to face. The government are talking of the TCS that we have to deduct, we have to pay to the government on any turnover greater than 50 lakhs with a particular customer. Say, for example, you've done a turnover of 50 lakhs. From the following month, any invoice that's going to be coming out, you have to pay the 3/4% TCS to the government and raise a debit note from to the customer. The customer, though you may raise the debit note and in your books there are a credit that's going to come in from the customer, God alone knows when you're going to get that money. It's going to take you 6 months, 3 months, because these are small amounts of 3/4%. This gets added on to the accounts receivables, which you already have with them. The other important aspect which the SMEs typically face these days is the demand. Ever since the COVID crisis has come in, we're all talking about finance, funding, a lot of things to the SMEs. How many of us have even talked about the demand? Where is the demand going to come in? Is there a fiscal stimulus that's coming up? If there is not going to be spending at the government level, if there's not going to be spending, or if there's not going to be any capex at the private level, private organizations, it's going to be very difficult for the SMEs to survive. Unless and until you have the government and the private organizations spend, where do you get your business from? You're going to be going around in the same circle. Just to share a little personal view of what's happening in our very organization, I don't think it's a great secret. I guess one of the professors had asked me the same question a couple of days ago as to what is the estimate of what is the downward turn you're going to see this year as compared to last year. And I suggested to her that it's going to be well over 30%. That's the kind of problems the SMEs are going to be facing. Now, coming back to one basic fundamental, yes, the government has stepped in giving in an additional 20%, which they are guaranteeing to these SMEs. 3 months have gone by. Is there a demand that's kicked in? Having borrowed the money from the government, what are they going to be using that for? Paying up for salaries? Paying up for the fixed cost, other fixed costs? Paying up for electricities? What's going to be happening? That's where we are. We are talking about we have funded 3 lakh crores, but what after that? Has there been any stimulus that's been given in so that more orders are available for SMEs to execute? Now, the other important aspect here is we have corporates pressing us not to ask for money. I was talking to a large corporate yesterday, wherein we are not interested in, he made a very clear statement, we are not interested in giving you business because you're asking us for the money which is due. He says openly that we haven't paid a lot of our suppliers for over 180 days. You can well imagine how large corporates behave in these kind of situations. Now, in this morning, I was just thinking, if something more can be done towards handling these larger corporates and handling the payments that are going to be made by government organization, that would help a lot better for the SMEs. These challenges are a few. Due to paucity of time, I think I'll just hand it over back to Professor Tulsi to see how she can take it over so that we can take on to the Q&A questions a little later.
Sure.
Tulsi.
Thank you, Mr. Varadhan. So you've touched upon the financing problems also, in addition to the other kinds of problems which, I mean, that's something which when we were discussing as well, this whole question of, you know, it's not just about financing these companies. It's also about how do you ensure that there is a demand for them. But I'm just going to go back to Manish and ask this question. This 3 lakh crore loan scheme for SMEs, right? So it seems to be very nice, right? But if you look at that scheme itself, there are some finer print points. With the facility being extended only for existing borrowers with a revenue of up to rupees 100 crores. Also, there seems to be a difference between the way in which banks and the NBFCs are being treated in terms of the interest that they can charge. So Manish, could you come in and tell us a little bit about more on the financing part, but also look at the demand? And here I'm just coming to that survey that we did with you people. What we found was that a large proportion of the people are availing of a moratorium, and they may or may not be desirous of taking a loan. And if you look at intent to borrow versus the intent to avail of a moratorium, that could be some kind of a proxy for the optimism with which they are looking at the business environment. So Manish, your comments on that.
Thanks, Professor Tulsi, for having me over. And I'm delighted to be part of this panel, very eminent panel. I'll give you some statistics and data from the moratorium percentage. Sometime in May, which is almost when the second month of lockdown, when it was imposed, the moratorium percentage for SMEs moved beyond a 50%. If I'm not wrong, around 53, 54%. And it has come down right now. It is hovering around to almost 25%. So I would feel that this reduction has largely happened because of a gradual crank up or a soft revival in the fortunes of SME businesses. And it is actually, and if you really go deeper into the lay of the land, north and semi-urban and rural parts of north are doing a little better. Almost all metros around the peripheral around the metros, the in western region, they are in a shut mode. South is quite patchy, and I would say West Bengal is absolutely not in a great state. So the sum total of all of this translates to that 25% of SMEs have been crying hoarse, and they have not been able to, they have requested for moratorium. The moratorium ends in just about a week's time from now.
Yes.
And the real problem for the system would actually be that what really happens when the moratorium ends. Now, there are various hypotheses. When the rubber hits the road, we'll see if 25%, in our case, actually, we had a collection efficiency of 98%. So from 75% or 72%, how quickly we bounce back to 98%, that will actually determine fortunes of most lending entities. Coming to SMEs, what are they going through? I would say a lot. In fact, I would feel there'll be a state of overwhelm as we speak to almost 15,000 SMEs. I think most SMEs are hit with a turnover reduction of 30 to 40%. And when you are hit with such a massive reduction of turnover, and the typical margins they make at an operating level around, say, 10%. Some might make higher, some might make lower, but the gross average is around 8 to 10%. If they have to reduce turnover by 40%, the cost structure, can it come down by 30 to 40%? Will they be profitable? And on top of it, when your debt is going to only increase because you're getting various SOPs and schemes, the debt to turnover ratio will alter. The interest cost structures will alter. I think what really is required, I'll come to that later, but the challenges they are right now will be facing is capital conservation, capital protection, having sufficient liquidity, and so in your war chest, so that you at least brave the storm. I feel for 6 more months, at least till March, while the pandemic is largely being absorbed now as something which we have to live with for a long haul, irrespective of when vaccine comes. And if that is the situation, my assessment is that most SMEs actually should be only preparing to be ready in the long haul and surviving this particular year. If they have to be ready in the long haul, what should they be doing? They have to be asset light. They need to have a scalable structure. They have to have the cost light. Perhaps we'll talk more about that. But the time right now is to shed off a lot of baggage and just focus on surviving the storm, braving the storm, and citing opportunities when you have resized the business model, what you should be doing next. I think the other part is that as an NBFC, it is always called a shadow bank. I think it's a very negative connotation when 55% of a business we do is do first time credits. Banks can't get out of their branches. I'm sorry. They would be cozy selling 50, 60 products from their branches. But going and walking up to customers' doorstep in the hinterland is a job of the NBFC. And NBFCs give the first credit or the last mile credit to most micro entrepreneurs of the country. And till such time we don't change the entire process of looking at shadow as the shadow banks, as the sunny banks, I think a lot would really need to be done on that aspect. I can only say that under Atmanirbhar, less than 1% of our customers have been able to avail of the scheme. So there is a lot in the scheme. While it's very good for the 1% who have benefited, they anyway would have had liquidity. But the balance 99% who still have not been able to avail of Atmanirbhar for various reasons, I think is something which we really have to see that now the scheme is almost at the last leg. How do we build inclusivity? So these are my quick views coming from the ground.
Thank you, Manish. Thank you so much. So, Dr. Nirvikar, I think Mr. Varadhan also spoke about a fiscal stimulus. And so he spoke about how can the SMEs really be helped, and that would require some kind of government efforts, would require a fiscal stimulus. Request you to shed some light on the viability of a fiscal stimulus in the current scenario. What is happening across countries? In the US, how do you think things are different? Are they any different from India? And what would be your 3-4 quick comments on how should MSMEs, or at least the government, help the SMEs in this particular scenario?
Yeah, well, you know, the US is in a unique position because of the international role of the dollar, and so the Fed and the US government have been able to essentially print money without stoking too much inflation. I think India is in a tough situation because its fiscal stimulus has been actually quite. I think once you strip out, you know, some of the you know, all the peripheral stuff and look at the core fiscal stimulus, it's actually not that large. And I've seen estimates suggesting that the fiscal stimulus in this case has been lower than what it was after the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, when and in this case the downward shock is much larger. So that would make a case for you know, a larger fiscal stimulus. And you know, I've actually argued for a larger fiscal stimulus. I guess the opposite view is, well, look what happened in 2007, 2008. You know, the fiscal stimulus led to higher inflation, and inflation expectations were higher, and it took us created a lot of problems. I think the crisis is just so bad that, you know, I would not worry about the fiscal deficit right now. And you know, I personally think that there should be a more of a targeted fiscal stimulus, basically putting more money in the pockets of the poor in particular, and that would deal with some of the demand issues, and I think definitely targeted support for small and medium firms, because and you know, subsidized loans and loan forbearance is not going to do it. Basically, you need something like you know, what the US is doing is basically giving loans and then forgiving them, you know, based on meeting some, you know, weak criteria. So I mean, I think that should be really an urgent policy for the Indian government. And then, you know, what to do about inflation and other issues, I think that has to be dealt with next year.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Nirvikar. Varadhan, we spoke about the challenges which were coming from the demand side. And what would be your mantras as far as the beating of this Chakravyuh is concerned from an SME perspective, because there is only that much that one can do. As far as the financing is concerned, we can only appeal to the governments. And as we were discussing, one of the important criteria is going to be to try and ensure that the receivables are better managed, and that whatever is due, that is paid up, the large part from the government and also from the private sector. But would you recommend an interest group? And I know that this would sound completely off key, but would you recommend something like, an interest group of the SMEs, which can actually push for some of these receivable related issues? And how do you tackle the demand part of it? Varadhan, you are muted. You're muted. Muted, please. Yeah.
Sorry. You raised 2 points, Professor. One was the receivable portion of it, and the other is the demand.
Yes.
Now, this is again a vicious, it's a Chakravyuh, right? My personal suggestion as I look at it, Manish could probably throw some extra light on it. Government says that we've got various schemes by which people can, discount their bills and get the money. Now, very honestly, what's the kind of margins that MSMEs make? We're talking of a gross margin of anywhere between 7% to 10%. With this 10%, what happens? A good portion goes off towards the interest payment to the for the loans that they have taken. They have their fixed costs and they have their other costs that come in. Added to that, the biggest culprit, I wouldn't make any bones about it, people may like it, people may not like it, is the government of India. When, in spite of the SMEs begging them for money, they don't pay them. Now let's take a step backwards and just say when each of our individuals file our returns. And when we file our returns, and if there is a delayed tax, the government levies us 12% per annum interest for paying the tax late. We are not paid on time. But on the contrary, when you got to get a refund, the government decides to give you only 6%, and to top it all, it taxes the 6% the following year, effectively getting nothing in return. Why should we have a dual thing in terms you have a set of policies for yourself and set for another person? When you add up to this, now what people say, the government of India today, when you have to execute an order for about 15 lakhs or 20 lakhs, the first thing they do is they deduct a TDS on the invoice and pay you the balance money. One side. The second side is, if you have already sold, say for example, 50 lakhs worth of material to a particular customer, what happens is you have to pay the government a TCS, because that tax you got to collect from the government. So these two things come in, we are in a soup. What my personal suggestion here as to how we can get out of it, the government should be more positive in saying that instead of 45 days, the SMEs need to be paid under 15 days. That's a rule which the government has to bring in. Let them bring in that rule. This is point one. The second point which they can probably do is, they can start paying them in advance against an advance bank guarantee. Say a 50% advance, by which they are able to manage the cash flows. When it comes to the private sector, it's easier that you start fining the private large corporates if they don't pay their suppliers on time. You got to use the carrot and stick method. There's no other method that these large corporates are going to listen to you. Or else you got to come into the product wherein you can actually, quote unquote, I'm using these words, do gundagardi with your suppliers, with your customers.
So I'm going to interject here. Almost all of what you're saying is the government should do this, right?
Yes.
Now, that's easier said than done. So the government may or may not be listening, right? So what do we do about it? I'm just going to give you one small perspective, and then maybe you can add, because we are already at 11:51, we'll run to Manish also, and then we'll take up the questions.
Okay.
Point is this, I was again, as I'm telling you, I'm giving you anecdotes of what people are doing. I think one has to understand and realize that the domestic environment at this point of time is tough. How do you look at trying to keep yourself afloat, as Manish said, survive, right? So I would look at actually markets which are very, very different, try and identify markets which are more receptive. And so countries like, say, for instance, South Korea are countries where the effect of the pandemic has been the lowest, where the supply chains were largely China driven, where they are willing to look at supply chains from India. Okay, but at the same time, you need to do an introspection of how do you look at your own quality, your own work ethic, your own culture, and then see how you can match. So I am not disputing anything of what you're saying,
Great.
right? But at the same time, there is something that we can do for ourselves. And what is that something we can do for ourselves is the question.
Yes. This is something that I was just going to come to this. You actually preempted the answer to what you're going to be asking. Because I've got a very specific thing on the quality. When it comes to quality, people start believing that the quality that comes out from India is not all that great, quote unquote. But I slightly disagree with that to a great extent. Because what off late people are doing, and they should continue to do this, and you can probably take it to the next level, is start having self-imposed quality control teams within the group.
Sure.
We don't need a separate quality team. So person who's manufacturing, he should be qualified to be a quality specialist himself, the manufacturer per se. And it does a lot of wonders. We've made a few exports to our principals the last few weeks, and being our own experts in quality, the quality what we supplied about say 5, 6, 7 years ago and what we've done today, there is a lot of difference. So the quantity has been very small. We're sure if we start becoming self-qualified quality specialists, we can take not one step, 10 steps ahead. Have I answered your question, Prof. Sir?
Yeah, sure. Sure, Varadhan. Manish, quick comments on how do you overcome the finance challenges for the SMEs? The capital and the financing.
Let's deal with this in two parts. One is what should MSMEs do and what should government do, because otherwise it can be actually a perpetual Chakravyuh.
Yes.
I think the most important part is that the SMEs will have to completely look at this opportunity and resize in multiple aspects. When I say resize your cost structure. If you were earlier viable at a 75 to 80% capacity utilization, how do you get viable at 50%? Consumption is not going to come back in a hurry. I can say with reasonable sightings that the turnover restoration of pre-COVID levels might happen by March 22. So we need to be prepared to understand that there is just no option but to resize. Have a very deep look at your cost. Some people may have materials as a large cost, some may have a labor as a large cost, some may have an interest as a large cost. So the cost engineering beneath each one of that will need a look. Assuming it is, for example, your financial costs are the highest, then it is just no option. You have to look at equity infusion, sub-debt capital, or any such structure which helps you resize your financial costs versus your current size of the business. If you're out of scale, you'll be out of business. That is absolutely clear. Apart from this, I would feel that the SMEs very clearly need to view this in two ways. I feel three things that have really happened in the country: the demonetization, which has driven deep digitization. Post demonetization, the GST, though a failed one to begin with, and now kind of finding its bearing, that is also driving very deep digitization. And now COVID is the largest CIO we can have in any company. It is driving digitization across So all the three crises, in fact, have stoked digitization to a new level. Now, what could smart, efficient players do? They can look at either do they want to go the mass way or the class way. If your products are of mass in nature, then you have to scale up, and digitization will completely give you the wings, the air below your wings to kind of really take off. Because be it GST, be it Demon, the digital payment tracks have substantially increased. So I feel somewhere really having a sharp look on what you want to be. Either you, if you really want to be a mouse or a scale player, then you have to really take steps in that direction. If you have to be a critical component manufacturer on whose life for the larger player survives on that, then you really need to figure out your niches. And logistics will play a very heavy role. If logistics cost in your business is going to be very disproportionately heavy, then you have to be more of a localized player. So I think somewhere having a deep introspection at this moment on what you cite yourself in the post-COVID era, which means that refixing, remodeling your business, getting that internal clarity, that is going to be extremely important. Basis which once things stabilize post say March, etc., you can then start moving or reorienting your ship in that direction. That is from the SME standpoint. What could government do? Lot of things. I think first is what they have done well, they should continue to do and not stop. The MSME subvention scheme, for no rhyme or reason, when all the MSMEs need subvention most right now, has been withdrawn, or at least it has not been reinstated. So very clearly, the 2% subvention needs to be enhanced to 4%, and money has to be put in the hands of the SMEs so that their cost of borrowing comes down, their interest servicing capability, that gets better. Fabulous job. Hats off as far as the credit guarantee scheme. Continue with that. NCTGC, the scheme of Atmanirbhar, has to be certainly made more inclusive. You have to be doing that. But these are on the financial side. Other things, if government also needs to learn from COVID, if the world is changing, so should government. The way we are currently running the SEZs or industrial businesses, we should move completely onto economic zones where there's a single window concept for completely all approvals. The SMEs find it much more conducive to do business and focus on business and focus on 168 approvals. I'm just putting a number 168 because I've heard it so many times.
Yeah.
So should you focus on business? Should you focus on quality? Should you focus more on the business, or should you focus running around after every state government, various approvals? That's going to be one. Second, government should really think of now regulator of regulator. I think we are too silo driven and we don't talk to each other. But for when 4 regulators can come in a meeting, when do they really collaborate? For example, I talk of housing finance. On one hand, we have a lot of long-term retiral liabilities sitting in PFs, sitting in pensions. On the other hand, we are giving 20-year term loans. Then we have projects and highways. Infrastructure is such a key theme. Why can't we create structures where the two can get married through a super regulator structure? So I feel these are times where there has to be more inclusive collaboration, less silos in general, and the lay of the land has to shift towards collaborative framework than competitive framework. So I think these are some of my views on how you can address Chakravyuh. We can get into more details.
Thank you so much, Manish. So I think there are some very interesting points which have emerged from all the 3 panelists today. We're looking at government having a very, very important role to play in supporting the SMEs. Whatever they have been doing, they ought to continue to do that. And as far as the SMEs themselves are concerned, there needs to be an introspection. There needs to be a self-regulation in terms of the quality. There needs to be a reorientation. Try and look at the costs which are the highest, try and pinpoint those costs and try and minimize that. And more important than anything else, and this is something which I personally also believe in hugely, that it may not be the era of competition. It may be the era of co-opetition, which will need to come in. So on this note, I think we should just go quickly over and look at some of the questions, because there are quite a few questions which have popped up in the chats. And Mohan, should I take over or will you be doing some? I can do some and you can come in between. Mohan there. Okay, so we have, I'm taking the last one now. Millions of SMEs bank with cooperative banks. Even a basic scheme like 20% liquidity cannot be offered by these banks due to the RBI standards. Any views? This is from Rajesh Bhura. Possibly Manish would be the right person to answer this.
I think, first of all, the cooperative banks were not included under the Atmanirbhar scheme. So that is really been a very sad miss. The second sad miss is that there are many NBFCs and some banks which are not in a position to lend further for various reasons, either of the liquidity or the 14% cost of fund by NBFC is not attractive. So what does an MSME do? He says that there's a government scheme and here I come, I need money. And you, Mr. Lender, you have your own issues. You're not, because either you are not been allowed to or you don't want to. So what should you do? I think very simple scheme where the guarantee is given by the government. So therefore, with that guarantee as a collateral in itself, if you empower the MSMEs to go to a lender of his choice and say, boss, this is guarantee I have got from the government, though my asset or loan asset is parked elsewhere, that guy does not want to give. Instead of you seeking NOC from that lender who anyway is not interested, I am giving you NOC and government is giving you guarantee. Can you please lend? So unless and until we don't create an empowering framework for the NOC and the guarantee, how will MSME get money? So somewhere it is got to do with the design thinking issue. This perhaps the tenets of this are answered over here, where this is best explained. We are trying, I must say, ministry is listening, talking, but at the speed at which things work, some of these issues get missed. So these points have been raised. We are expecting solace. If solace is not coming, grief is on the way. Simply put, this is where the Atmanirbhar scheme is right now. It is not there for individual borrowers. Almost all entrepreneurs are either proprietors or they run their company in a Ram and Shyam company. But Mr. Ram and Shyam will have one loan. I have a Ram and Shyam company as another loan. When you go back to the government, they say, no, there are two different entities. I cannot give money against this and all of that. So these are the kind of smaller, finer issues which need sorting out. And unless and until there's a deep intent to really allow this to happen, the crores of MSMEs who probably need this, money won't flow. It will stay jammed. It will only flow the guys who already have enough money.
Sure.
So it's a problem it's a barbell strategy. On one hand, excess liquidity guys anyway have liquidity. Everybody's rushing them to give money. On the other hand, who really need it, they will decay and rivalry stop.
Yeah, the classic lemons problem. I think. Yeah.
Can I ask a question to Dr.
Yes,
Singh?
sir,
Dr. Singh, see, while it is nice to say that, SMEs should focus on areas A and B and C. This is a question asked by one of the participants here, one of the attendees here. He says that, look, SMEs are limited resources. Okay, they can only target one or two problems at a time. Okay, right? So as we have addressed in this webinar, there are problems in finance, there are problems in operations, there are problems in government policies, which may be outside of our control. Okay. So if you are advising an SME on a more macro kind of basis, if you are advising the entire community on a more macro basis, which are the problems you tell them to sort out first?
So if one thinks of finance and other cost of doing business as being outside one's control in the short run, I think the way forward for an SME is really to look for operational efficiencies. And I guess I'm echoing Mr. Jaiswal's point. There's this, among economists, there's what is now quite a famous study of, Mumbai textile mills by several economists, which found that, just making some very simple improvements in inventory control and the layout of the, factory floor really led to significant profitability improvements. So what was interesting was, you didn't need an MBA to implement these kind of improvements. And so the puzzle was, well, why wasn't it happening? And perhaps the answer is that there's no competitive pressure. So you can get by with those inefficiencies. So as I think my practitioner colleagues were saying, and Dr. Jayakumar was also saying, this is exactly the time to look for operational efficiencies. And I think many MSMEs have some possibilities that they haven't explored. Sometimes the problem is not having enough. This again a point Dr. Jayakumar made, not having enough internal talent. But honestly, I think the kinds of efficiency improvements that can be made don't require high-priced external consultants. So I would say that this is something where I think business schools can actually do MSMEs a big favor by saying, well, here's what we, and probably Dr. Jayakumar is already doing this, but really operational efficiency in a nutshell. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Singh. And Varadhan, I have a question to ask you here. Okay, right? I think while you were talking about, you are using a terminology which was carrot and stick. Okay. But most of what I heard from you was related to stick. Okay. I would also like to ask you, what is the carrot you will give to large corporates or to government for ensuring that, that SMEs are motivated to perform better? Okay. Right. There has to be some carrot also, right? I mean, for example, you might say that, if I am a large corporate and I buy from an SME supplier, am I given a benefit in terms of something or the other so that, or benefit to pay the SME on time? I mean, that doesn't seem so apparent as of this point. Yeah.
Sure. Here is the thing. When I talk of a carrot and stick, on the stick portion I've spoken about, could you ask me this question on the carrot? Now, dealing with a large corporate, say for example, he has a total requirement of say 100,000 pieces in a year. You can offer him the just in time, which is going to be brilliant. He doesn't have to keep inventory for himself. You can assist him in doing his troubleshooting at his location. You could have stocking of their products so that he can just pick it up just if he needs it anytime he wants. This would be a great thing for him, by which he's going to be saving on inventory costs too. Or the second portion is work on a back-to-back basis with each SME. Say, for example, a large corporate is dealing with a particular supplier, one small SME. Work on a back-to-back for everything. In the event the large corporate gets a better price, he should be good enough to give him the better price. The large corporate gets a lower price for himself, he should be good enough to give him, the SME should be good enough to accept those lower prices. It should be more transparency, and I'm sure the large corporates will benefit in the process. Have I answered your question?
If I can add to a bit to this is that we spoke about Threads a little while back. Now, Threads as a platform, if I am not mistaken, the overall cumulative debt on Threads is just around 3,000 crore out of total MSME loans of 15 lakh crore and total banking debt of 80 lakhs crore. So what it really means that the platform is up, there are 4 players and there are investments made and the platform is not kicking. There's an RBI platform as well. So is it really the platform is an issue? The real issue is something else. It is the intent. Unless and until the intent is not very clearly spelled out that the large corporates have to place smaller ones on time and it is not administered through the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, I can confirm to you that bills are being put on Threads under Samadhan scheme, and under Samadhan scheme, the same corporate says, settle it offline. Don't go on the platform. If you go there, you are out of business. And since you're at clemency of business, what does the poor MSME do? So actually my heart goes out to the MSMEs when I hear such problems. And this problem is completely got to do with weak administration. And why does all corporates, most of them register MSMEs as others on the balance sheet on 31st of March? If it is shown as MSMEs and the creditor these days have in 90 days, why is there not a penalty on them? So I think it is completely got to do with execution flaws until such time these don't get addressed. The liquidity permeation at the speed and flow both will stand impeded. So this actually needs more administrative reforms than just putting out a mere circular hoping things would work.
Thank you. Thank you.
I don't know, Mr. What would you feel about it?
Manish, I can't agree with you more. The typical thing is most large corporates, like I keep saying this, and it's one of my favorite things, they don't want to register you as SMEs at all. And if they want to pay you, in case you ask them for money, they only tell you one thing: why are you asking me for money? Other suppliers don't ask me for money at all. So they don't want to pay you either. So that's a little thing. And I think, as you rightly put it up, they should be penalized big time. They should not use the word SMEs. If they're not paid the SMEs on time, they shall be penalized. You should penalize everybody, the corporates, anybody who has got to pay. If they don't pay on the committed time, say 30 days, 60 days, they have to be, government has to be penalized. Government should penalize these people by maybe 0.5%, 0.25%, maybe a token. More than anything, even a token they are penalized. The seniors in the organization tend to believe, yes, it's time I get out of this mess by being called a defaulter for not paying the suppliers on time. Now, I just have one small little statement here, Mohan. I think you can probably throw some light. When you default on a bank loan, you're put across as a defaulter. Correct? So we are not paid the bank loan in 30 days or 45 days, the interest is not paid, you're put in as a defaulter. Why can't the government also put something similar to these large people, that they are defaulters? When you name and shame those people, the large corporates will tend to change. That's the only way how you can get the large corporates to pay SMEs on time. Your thoughts on this, Manish and Mohan?
I would go on to further say, get them onto credit bureau. And if it comes there, I think a lot of things will fall in place, because and this actually should lead to a comprehensive credit scoring. If that get into a scoring and a rating mechanism, a lot of things will fall. The things around administration and things around rating and scoring all put together will ensure that this gets driven till the end. Otherwise, it will continue to be in a state of languor.
Thanks.
The question that is being asked by Amit is precisely this. He says, when everybody knows that there is a problem, why is it not being addressed at a certain kind of a speed? And why is there a delay to such an extent? Mr. Varadhan, what do you understand out of that? Why is there a delay? So you spoke about Mr. Nitin Gadkari coming and promising something. And as we were discussing a couple of weeks back, he still spoke about a certain number which had not been paid by the government. So why this mismatch between intent and action?
Probably, is it because the government does not have money, they're not paying on time? I thought this could be one reason. The second reason could probably the kind of the kind of issues that go around in MSME in the government sector about why should they pay the SMEs on time? I mean, why should they pay anybody on time? Okay, we'll take our own time and pay. It's arrogance, possibly. The thought at the various departments lower down. Again, here the senior people, senior bureaucrats should take it up onto them to ensure people pay. They should be evaluated if they don't pay on time. Even they ask to pay.
Yeah, I also somehow think that it has to do with the culture of India. So, as a culture, I think we are kind of lackadaisical when it comes to, because if you look at any one of these SMEs, which are largely exporting and don't want to, because this is an interesting insight. I was talking to some of these SMEs and saying that now that, the geopolitics are looking a particular way, your exports are not happening, are you going to change your focus to the domestic? They said, we are willing to wait it out. But we don't want to change that focus because the kind of problems culturally of people making payments, of the receivables not being there on time, of languishing in terms of just holding on. It's not just the large corporates, it's also amongst each other and also the government, right? So maybe it's a culture and would require a certain kind of changing.
Yeah, I can tell you one thing which we personally do. And when you do that, I think you have more strength to ask for your money. Now, as a policy in my own organization, I can very proudly say that we have never delayed a single payment to any of our suppliers across the globe.
Sure.
And when you do that, you also get the strength to actually scream at your customers and say, you bloody well pay up. And you actually do it. And fortunately for me, I'd just like to share, putting pressure on the customer. It's your money. You don't have to be scared about it. You can ask for it. I tell every single person in my organization, you don't need to be scared to ask for your money. I pick up the phone and say, this is due, you pay me. The reason I can do it very proudly is, and without a problem, is because I pay my suppliers on time. I think it's a culture which you're going to start within yourself. And I can assure you, you can actually push your customers to pay you better.
Absolutely.
Dr. Tulsi, I want to ask you one question.
Yes.
It's a very interesting question asked by Girish Bhagat, where he says that, given that we all keep talking about this quality issues in SMEs and so on, okay, right? Obviously, you need better quality and, over a period of time to build this thing that India becomes at the forefront of quality goods in the world, okay, right? So obviously, to go towards that target, you need to maybe make technology acquisitions and so on, like maybe acquisitions of, you may not have it. It will take you too long to, sort of invent it and, do it for yourself. Okay. So you have to go across the world and look around and, get suitable technology for yourself. Okay. Is there a case to be made for some provision of capital for these kind of things at all? I mean, like, for example, a sovereign fund or something which enables you to sort of go and make these acquisitions around the place. Okay. Is there a framework at all? I mean, something novel which can be thought about for making this, because SMEs are otherwise, they live in their own cocoon, right? They really aren't bothered about technology and all for the most part. They do what they've been doing for all these years.
So, the way I would look at it is, it's not a supply side problem.
Mm-hmm.
You have to look at the whole problem of technology acquisition from a demand side and a supply side.
Okay.
Right? So if there is an SME which has the adequate skills to use that technology, I don't think the funding is that the most important problem.
Okay.
What do you do when you have access to technology which you do not know how to use? Or B, you are, so this ties up with also one of the other questions that I saw on the HR part, where you have the key person risk so strong, where everything is led by one person or two people, okay? The technology acquisition per se will not make much of a difference. So while the sovereign fund is one of the solutions to acquisition of technology, to me, it's just a supply side. The demand side to me is far more relevant, and that is because SMEs probably do not have the skill gap between a large and a small sector is very, very huge.
Fair enough. Okay.
And the Chakravyuh kind of percolates because if you want to acquire that technology, you need to have the right human resources. For the right human resources, you need to pay the right kind of salaries and the salary structure. And if you're in a low productivity sector or you're not making enough money, how are you going to pay those people? So I think it's a vicious cycle.
One of the suggestions that I can make out to the SMEs, I mean, it's a personal thing that I believe will help them to a certain extent, may not to a great extent. Typically, we talk, and most SMEs, I mean, Tulsi, I could stand corrected, most SMEs believe in talking of gross margins. Am I right on this?
Yes.
I think the people talk of gross margins only.
Yes.
I think they need to shift their thought process from a gross margin to something different, which is called a contribution. There's a little difference between using gross margins and contribution. Now, when you say you're working on a 20% gross margin, you're working on your material cost being 100, you're selling it at 120. When you're talking of a 20% contribution, you're talking of a material cost of 80 and selling it at 100. By this, what happens? It's more a mental block in a person when he says, on a 20% gross margin, I'm prepared to give a 5% discount or a 10% discount. Say he gives a 10% discount, he's prepared to keep a 10% gross margin. But when he starts working reverse way on a contribution, then we're talking a 10% discount on 100. Mental, it's more mental. It comes to 90. When your actual gross margin, instead of being 10%, it's going to be 11.5%. It's a small little bit increment. And this can actually boost him to a great extent to offset many other things. This is a small little suggestion, and believe me, it works.
Sure.
We work on those levels only.
Okay. Very good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think there are questions around e-commerce and how that can help the SMEs. So if any of the panelists would want to take that over, there is one question on, can the e-commerce companies help in the marketing? We are in a market-based mechanism. I don't think there's a question of helping anyone. But Mr. Varadhan, Manish, anything on e-commerce and how SMEs can actually leverage e-commerce to grow?
So I can tell you this is a real opportunity, and it is just gaining in speed for a lot of wallets where they're the consumers on one hand and the suppliers on the other side. Specifically over the last 3 to 4 months, there are deep discussions. We are almost near signing with one of the largest wallets in the country. And actually, especially when it comes to consumption items, people are not venturing out. The sales through online have increased by more than 40%. In fact, even in areas like Panvel, Bhiwandi, the warehousing industry is rising. The logistics is kind of really for this has been massively reorganized. So that is growing. The delivery boys are most in demand right now. I mean, if you did not know that, in fact, the most coveted lot of the delivery boys were coming and supplying to your homes. So this entire ecosystem, I think, is now becoming more like an habit. I think something which you do for 120 days non-stop, day in and day out, sitting at your home, it kind of becomes almost a new habit formation. So ecosystem financing, supply chain financing, all of these are getting integrated. We are looking at integrating these with our own platform through these payment wallets. And I think it will form a very sizable part of our business as we proceed. So we are looking at digital financing, ecosystem financing as the next new normal, which for certain is going to be the way we underwrite. The conventional underwriting will go through a quiet requirement, all those alternative lending methods of CMA-based data. I think a lot of alternative data, so much of data is coming. We are kind of really working on alternative data and new structural data to underwrite short-term loans. So these will be the new generation financing. And it's already happening as we speak, but it's getting furthermore tailwind for a better propelling forward.
I have a question for Dr. Nirvikar sir. Now, with the US, what you're going through in the US for the SMEs there, how would you correlate vis-a-vis in India, and how much can we imbibe as to what they are doing there back into India? What's your thoughts on that?
So I think I'd like to distinguish between the special circumstances that we're facing now and more normal times. So I think what you're seeing in the US in this kind of circumstance is what you might expect when the need is greater than the availability. Who's been getting in the front of the queue for special loans and so on? It's the bigger firms, right? They're the ones, and this is even among small firms. The smallest firms are the ones who don't have relationships with the banks or so on. So that sort of size advantage really favors whoever is larger in this kind of circumstance. But if you look at normal times, I would say that in the US you have a lot more support for small businesses. And you do have things like small business loans. The Small Business Administration actually provides training for small people who want to start a business and so on. And that it's completely missing from the government in India, and that I think goes back to some deeper roots that some of you were referring to, where there's this sort of adversarial or suspicious culture between business and government. And I think that's where, again, I think that government at all levels, local, state, and central government in India should be doing better. I'm actually surprised that the central government in India currently is not more attuned to small business. I would have thought that given the origins of their political support, they would actually be much more attuned to the needs of small business. And that's something I think that really needs to change in India.
Okay.
Sure. I think there are a few other questions here. There was one long question I seem to have, because there are questions coming up again and again. Just give me a minute, please. There was a long question from Amit. So I'm just reading this out quickly. The current system looks very confrontational for the SMEs. So there seems to be, within this ecosystem, there seems to be a friction with all the actors, whether it is with the government, whether it's with the large corporates, lenders, regulatory bodies, and all of this is going to drain out the MSME resources. So where will they focus on quality, which could overtake China? So this needs to be redesigned totally. Appreciate your insights. Mohan, would you want to answer that? I think we've been saying
I think what the gentleman says is right. It does appear a little adversarial and confrontationist. That is a fact. Okay, right? And there are a lot of areas in which one would assume that the existence of MSMEs can be smoothened out so that they can focus on the main task at hand, which is producing quality stuff and selling it at prices which are competitive. Okay, right? I sometimes wonder, so for example, Varadhan keeps talking to me at times and he says that his big clients sometimes just call him and tell him that, look, I need a 30% discount on stuff due to this COVID. Okay, right? And sure, so, they are justified in asking, obviously, because they themselves are going through problems. So they ask their suppliers, which are the MSMEs, for a discount or for a lowering of the prices. Okay. Now, the challenge which an MSME owner like Varadhan will face is that if he's going to lower his prices by that much, who does he pass on that, that this thing to, so that he's not impacted very adversely, right? So obviously, part of it, an MSME owner can think of it like this, that, okay, can it go into salary reduction of employees? But then you have a very demotivated kind of staff with you. You do reduce salaries a little bit, but you don't ideally want to do that because people also have their people also build their lives around a particular salary and so on. They have EMIs to pay, they have other expenses to handle and so on. So it's not an easy thing to just reduce salary across board. Okay. The other thing you try doing is that you try to see who else in the ecosystem is able to take a sacrifice. Okay. And today what happens is that, while I'm not saying that this is necessarily the correct way to look at it, but I believe that, while yes, you've given a moratorium moratorium has been given by the financial sector for repayment of EMI, repayment of various dues and all that in the 6-month period. But it is nevertheless only a moratorium. It is not really a write-off, or it is not really a, this thing given to them. It's just a deferment, right? It is not really that, they don't have to pay it at all, or they don't, they've been given a complete write-off of everything. So where do they ultimately pass it on to? The ultimate hit comes to you in the form of your equity. Your equity is going to get diluted. You're losing your equity in the business completely. Okay, right? So that is the Chakravyuh which companies are facing today. It's all nice. It's all nice for us to talk saying that yes, they should do this, they should do that. But look, if my equity is getting diluted, my equity is getting lost, and the system is not buffering me, is not giving me any shock absorption capacity at all, and everything is only due to come to me. Why am I doing this business at all? Okay, that is where the adversarial this thing comes on, and everybody thinks in terms of everybody else as an adversary. Okay, I think. Partially, therefore, as the panelists have explained here, partially it has to come from the government on one side, a reach out from the government, trying to make payments quicker, trying to give schemes which will help MSMEs to, sort of survive through these bad times. Okay, some of which has been done, a lot of it yet to be done. Okay, partially putting pressure on large companies to make sure that they pay on time, so that there is no adversarial this thing over there, because a lot of MSMEs supply to large companies. Okay. Part of it giving them motivation to, continue to hold labor and not, just to come on TV or come on public media and say that, companies should not sack employees is not the right approach, right? Ultimately, there has to be some motivation. Why would I not sack an employee if I'm not making any money at all? Okay, right? I don't have a choice, right? It's ultimately I'll take a decision like that only when I come to that point. Okay. So all these have to be put in place in a manner that it becomes a slightly more smoother existence for MSMEs. Today, I sense that some part of it has been done. Manish himself has confirmed that some part of it has been done. Varadhan also says that some of it has been done. Okay. Dr. Singh also has suggested a few things, but a large part of it yet has to be done. Otherwise, as Manish said, in the next 6-8 months, when we really face brutal reality, we'll suddenly find that most MSMEs are not in a condition to reopen. And that is what we don't want to happen, because the statistics, Dr. Tulsi, that you showed up are fairly frightening. I think the MSMEs are very large employers. Okay, number one, they constitute a significant proportion of GDP. Number two, okay, so they are very important for the economy. And if they collapse, if 50% of the MSMEs collapse and they are unable to reopen, this is going to be tough times for the economy in the next 2 years.
So Mohan, segging from that, I just want to take this very interesting question, which I'm going to try and relate to the FMB bit also. And right. We've kind of run through most of the questions as I see it, but while if there are other questions, we can take them up. There is this interesting question from Harmeet Chavla, who talks about the need for, so finance is important, but how much should be the focus on people and enable better outcomes from these people around their business objectives? This is a good time for HR related transformation as they look at reviving their fortunes and navigating for a better future. So I would just like to add a couple of things here from an FMB perspective as well, because most of these SMEs are after all family managed businesses. Now, when you're looking at capital, one kind of a capital, of course, is the financial capital, but there is a large capital, which is the family social capital. Right? And that family social capital has been built over a long period of time, where they've been providing employment, where they've been doing community interventions, where they have been, a certain kind of customer outlook and approach. Part of that receivables problem that we are talking about, Varadhan, is also this family orientation, that it's okay. This guy is my customer. I've known him. Theek hai, 180, right? So that's also a part of, so all of that comes from there. And so when we are talking about this transformation, we will need to tread very carefully, because a sudden transformation may lead to a complete change in the character of the FMB itself. And there may be an erosion of social capital, which may be far more damaging than the lack of financial capital and so on. Right? Because financial capital the gap can be addressed. Social capital gap cannot be addressed. And right. Here, what I would want to point out is the fact that when you're looking at dealing with, say, employees, and I'm now wearing both my hats. I'm wearing the FMB hat and the economist hat, right? So when, Mohan, you're talking about how will they really manage? Because if I don't have money, I will need to sack my employees. So there is not only just a lack of the social capital, but you're also contributing to the overall downturn.
Absolutely.
Because when you're sacking these guys, there is going to be a lack of demand at the aggregate level, right? And it's going to come back to you, right? So a lot of the students call me up and talk to me about what should we be doing. There have to be ways and means. You will have to look at alternative ways of keeping your flock together. Maybe there has to be a more democratic way of saying that we all take salary cuts, right? But there would have to be a different way of looking at it altogether. And the other kind of a thing is also this temptation to go about doing a price gouging kind of a thing. Customers are going to come back and they are also going to resent whatever you're doing during this crisis. So my point is this: is there an HR transformation which looks possible around this time? Is it a good time for an HR related transformation? The answer is yes. How do you bring in the skills? But at the same time, you need to make sure that the family business is not, it's a combination of two words, it's family and business, and it can't exist without either. So how do you professionalize while keeping the culture together? So that's what I would like to bring.
I'll just add one word to it. This can be sorted out pretty easily. There's something called discipline. The minute you have the discipline, you can put across what you need in the F&B business to ensure while your finance is being taken care or your social responsibility also is taken care. What is key to the word is discipline. You could put across getting your payments on time in a fashion which is not going to hurt your social responsibility. So if there is discipline there, it works.
Sure. So a lot of it has been emotion driven in the past. So, discipline and emotion may not go hand in hand is the point.
Manish, I have one question to you, which is about the, little bit taking off from this carrot and stick, this thing. Very surprisingly, one of the pleasant fallouts of this original IBC, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code in India, was that because the threshold was fixed at a very low level of rupees 1 lakh, okay, right? A lot of companies, a lot of suppliers chose to file bankruptcy petitions against their debtors, as you would call them, okay, for non-payment. And, because those used to be larger companies and they didn't want to go through the embarrassment of a legal process, many of them just paid up and, to withdraw those petitions and so on, okay. Now, unfortunately or fortunately, the cutoff has been made to rupees 1 crore. Okay, while yes, it is understandable that in these adverse circumstances, you don't want to have too many petitions lining up in front of the court. But does this by itself have any adverse consequence? Do you want to turn the clock back after all this ends a little bit and bring it back to put some more discipline on the large guys?
I think this is the last resort. We should have far more proactive measures than actually going to the NCLT as the last route. And I think the real issue is actually a structural reform. And it is almost 70 years now that 70% of banking business is with public sector banks. Now, they are awash with capital. And then there are private banks and they are running into rough weather because of 1 or 2 incidents which have happened. So even a lot of saving deposits are again migrating to public sector banks. Now, after this, then there are NBFCs which after 2 events of big crisis, they have become, they look tainted. So therefore, the entire money is parked with public sector banks, and public sector banks are giving more and more to the AAA rated and the top tier level corporates. Now, the dissemination of this at the root cause has to happen. Somebody has to come up and say that why would a large name like this, of this nature, which is sitting on a 10,000 crore liquidity or a 5,000 crore liquidity, paying after 1 year, paying after 6 months. So I guess while certainly NCLT rewinding the clock would be helpful, but I think the larger issue would be, I again go back to saying that unless and until we don't create the liquidity transmission from a large bank to a large corporate to a small entrepreneur, the cycle won't really turn. But we will then only be addressing at the last tail when everything is gone and the SME is finished. At that point, he is resorting because that's his last remnant or residue which is left. So I guess somewhere at the source, if we address the problem, that will be far better than addressing at the lowest strata.
Fair enough. Thanks. Dr. Tulsi, would you like to take one last question somewhere?
So there is an interesting question from one of the family managed business students. He says, is this time for diversification from traditional family businesses? So I would like to hear the views of the others, but as far as I'm concerned, I would say the idea should not be to be in family business. The idea should be for the family to be in business.
Wow.
So whether it is, so it doesn't really matter whether it is a traditional business. You need to see, because I think what is going to be the most critical thing is going to be how do you adapt. I think this time more than any other time in the world, one should really read Darwin and talk about survival of the species. So I think if you want your family to be in business, there has to be a right assessment of, is this the kind of business that is going to have a demand in the years to come? And probably then do a fair assessment. And then, so I would not want to call it a traditional versus anything which is new in that sense. But some of the others could possibly take this question as well.
I can share my suggestions. I think what really is very important is whether it's your own business or anybody else's business. What really matters is the purpose. And if the purpose is just to make money, it is very short purpose.
Right.
Unless until the purposefulness or the meaningfulness of the business and its existence is not really very clearly articulated, I think we will run into issues. And the second important thing I really believe is in inclusive diversity. This entire thing about letting go and say, this is me, my kingdom, and my lo behold, I think this really needs to change. Rather, we have to look at that. If this is the purpose and this is my business, how do I attract the best talent, whether it is business origination, whether it is manufacturing process or a quality. So therefore, then you start to collaborate and get the experts which are aligned to that common purpose. I feel that anybody who really wants to build a large institution or convert and from the entrepreneurship to an enterprise at some stage, these two will become a very key differentiating factors for scale up.
Sure. So Mohan, do we stop it there?
I think we'll bring this webinar to a close now. I think we already exceeded time by over 10 minutes. Thank you very much, Dr. Singh, for having participated in this all the way from the US. I know it's your night time. It's maybe beyond your sleeping time right now. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing your views on the Indian SME sector, comparing it with the US sector, and giving us some helpful suggestions. Thank you very much, Varadhan, for participating in this. Again, giving your very invaluable advice on, the problems being faced by MSMEs at a core level, their resolution, the way you look at it, and, what people should be doing to survive. Manish, again, always a pleasure to have you, articulate your views. You're always so full of facts and, you deliver your punches so effectively. I mean, I'm really impressed with the way you're, given so many helpful suggestions to people to take back. Okay. And Tulsi, as usual, I think, this has been a wonderful journey, this entire webinar. You just hit the right spots because of your experience, both in economics as well as in family business. So you are like a person who is, walking on two rails at the same time. You know what are the challenges of MSMEs, family business. On the other side, you are such a, eloquent economics, person yourself, okay, right? So I think all of you all, this has been a really wonderful session. Thank you all. And, hopefully we will take back some of these things onto it. There's a press covering it. There'll be some reporting and, we will try and share some of these findings as part of CFS and CFMB to the government of India and try and see if it could make some change in the way they look at things. Okay. Thank you all.
One last suggestion, please. There are brilliant questions which I think I would like to go through. If somebody, because if all of us exit Zoom, it will get lost. If somebody can kindly stay back and record or copy paste all the questions and send to me, I would really like to mull over it. And I found them very, very insightful. So their thoughts they'll be helping in deeper thinking.
Manish, we'll try and put them down in one paper and give it to you. But in case you want to look at it earlier, they are already on the group chat. Okay. So they're already on the group chat. All of them have been tabulated there. So you can see it. There are about 45 questions or so, which have come up there.
Fantastic. That's fantastic.
We try to address most of those, but we'll come back to you. If there are points, we'll definitely come back to you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. And bye.
Thank you all
Thanks.
very much. Thank you, Professor Nirvikar. Thank you, Varadhan. Thank you, Manish.
Thanks, Prof.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Manish.
Mohan. Thanks. Thanks, Tulsi.
Thanks, Mohan.